Welcome to Business Uncomplicated. Our guest today is Varun Jain, who's had an unusual career trajectory from Lehman Brothers analyst turned BGC consultant to serial entrepreneur. But there is a method to the madness. He's been chasing the same problem from different angles for about 15 years. And it's really, how do you make complex business processes actually work? At Mentra, he grew mobile apps to 10 million users. At his own startup, Zoomtail, he hit 2 million in revenue in 18 months, serving fashion SMEs. At Instabase, he led AI products for Fortune 100 banks. And now at ComplyJet, he's trying to solve what he calls the deal killer problem. At the moment, when startups are losing customers because they can't prove they're SOX 2 compliant, with the aim really to build trust with his customers. From building risk models on Wall Street to building compliance tools for two-person startups, Varun has seen how the same fundamental problems show up everywhere. And today we're going to talk about what actually works, what is just expensive theater, and why the best solutions make hard problems feel boring. So I welcome Varun to the podcast, and let's get going.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So welcome to Business Uncomplicated. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Great. We're excited to talk to you today. We've done I've been looking at your LinkedIn a lot, and you have a lot of interesting things to say. So I want to dive into some of that later on about just some of the advice you're giving to other founders, because I found it very insightful myself. But let's just start off, and maybe you can give the listeners a little bit of background about you. We did a little introduction about, your beginnings, but would love to hear it in your words about how you started your career, about how you wound up here creating ComplyJet.
Absolutely. I started off my career on the Wall Street, used to work at an investment bank in Tokyo, and spent some time in consulting after that, advising Fortune 500 companies. And what I realized very quickly is it was much more fun for me to be building things rather than only advising or taking part in financial transactions. Over the last 15 years, I have spent my time in building and scaling products across payments, e-commerce, and enterprise software industries. The last thing which I was doing before ComplyJet was I was a product leader at a company called Instabase, building large-scale document processing and workflow automation solutions for the biggest banks and insurance companies out there. And I've always been very interested in supporting other founders' journeys as well. I've been fairly active angel investor and advising other entrepreneurs. And the reason I jumped into ComplyJet was partly the lessons, I was seeing from their journey, plus my own observations around security and compliance area at Instabase. It's been meandering, but over time, I saw that what really got me passionate was to help other businesses. And that's been, the connecting thread over the last decade or so of my work.
Yeah. You've been in very different industries, but it seems like a lot has been centered in the banking, insurance, which are highly compliant areas. I spent the first 10 years of my career working in banking, so very aware. I was in this very niche part of banking called cash management, which a lot of people never hear about because it just provides products and services to corporate people. And one of our biggest clients was Exxon. Now, of course, Exxon paid like a penny for all their transactions, but we had a book this big, this back in the 90s, where we had to read it and comply with all their rules and regulations. So you've talked about kind of seeing the same problems and solving the same problems. How have you seen that problem change from, maybe the book that sits on the shelf that somebody has to understand, now moving into whether it's been the SaaS technology and now even into AI?
Ultimately, a lot of large companies have to come up with the processes to organize themselves. And whether it is cash management at a large bank or some other workflow in a large company, ultimately, large enterprises have to organize themselves to behave and execute in a predictable fashion. And one of the themes that I have seen in my work in enterprise software or as a consultant in previous life is a lot of the value lies in understanding the why a process was required in the first place, and then thinking deeply about what are some ways in which technology can or other operational things can improve a certain process. I think sometimes technologists can make the mistake of looking at something and judging it to be inefficient, whereas a process was the right answer in the context it was, first thought of by the people who put it together. And just to give you a couple of examples, when I was working at Instabase, I saw all kinds of different processes at large banks and global insurance companies. Some of them actually had to do with cash management apps, which were dealing with, like hundreds of millions of dollars on a daily basis. The volume, of these applications can be really big. And some of them had been built more than a decade ago. They did not have APIs, and the teams who had built these applications had gone away. And it was very challenging for both the technology and operations teams in these organizations to keep up with what is a truly legacy application, but also look to improve the efficiency of that. And that's where platforms like Instabase were super helpful. We allowed people to create various applications on our platform using AI and other technologies to improve the processes of any business workflow. And I think I noticed the same thing around security and compliance, that there were a lot of workflows which were eating away the time from different teams, like whether it was security and compliance teams or sales and product teams, who all, needed to work around this, especially around the procurement process. I know, Rich, that
Right.
you have been on both sides of the table around procurement. So ultimately, I think like process can be a bad word, but like it is what makes the things go. And the role of, whether you're a salesperson or a technologist, is to understand how can you improve a certain process and make it, work in a more predictable, value
Well,
generating way.
yeah, it's so funny you say that. Two of the things I love is process and governance. And it's the two words that probably when executives hear, just like, you're just slowing my company down. And I think that what I've seen over the years as well is people can implement technology. And so I think if you think of the early days of SaaS, right? Salesforce used to sell into the business because, IT is just going to slow us down. The business is like, great, let's implement this. And what we found is a lot of really bad implementations of software.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was funny that IT was the one saying, hold up, what is your business process? And a CIO I work with, the first question she asks every time she gets asked to do a project is, what problem are you solving? Because the technology is going to do whatever I tell it to do, guys. But what problem do we solve? What are we aiming to fix? So I think that's a question that a lot of businesses don't spend time on. And I think it has a lot to do with the business process, because unlike technology, the business process is kind of quickly evolves, and sometimes technology doesn't keep up with it. But often I don't think the technology needs to.
Yeah, I think one of the problems around the process and technology is simply of coordination. In large organizations, you would often find that there are three different teams. There is a team which is looking at the overall P&L of a use case or a different category inside a company. There may be a large operations team which is making sure that everything which is required to make things work are happening, and whether it is about servicing consumer clients or servicing large corporate clients, there is usually a large operations element. And then there would be a technology or IT team which is supporting and adding technology and making sure all the systems are working. A lot of times the problems arise when these three teams are not able to work in sync. And at least in my work as an advisor or helping create better enterprise solutions for companies, I've realized that it is very important to bring all the three teams together.
Mm.
As long as we understand what is the nature of the problem we want to solve, how would we define success, and we are able to bring these various stakeholders on the same table and align them around the same goal with responsibilities across the different teams, it is much easier to make progress. I think often what happens is that the teams are not aligned, and as a result, they are spending a lot of time
Right.
just talking past each other or blaming each other for lack of progress.
Yeah. I mean, 1,000%. I think we see that all the time. And I think the interesting part of your journey is as similar to mine as you were in corporate, you went to consulting, you went the founder route. And so you start pivoting and you're like, well, this is the same problem, but now I'm solving it internally versus externally. And I've always found being on the external side of the politics is so much more enjoyable than the internal side of the politics
Yeah, I
because I feel
think
like
it's
that is
also
challenging. Yeah.
about like who do you choose to solve the problem for. Like in my own career, I have worked with small companies all the way up to Fortune 100 companies, and all of them require a very different set of muscles. And as a founder especially, you have to be very intentional about both where can you be effective and what do you enjoy, because serving a large global Fortune 100 organization is very different than solving early stage companies. And very few organizations are able to cut across different segments, and they, like become institutions for a good reason, because that is really, really hard to do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the compliance problem and ComplyJet and, kind of what you guys saw in the industry and why you developed the software you guys developed.
Absolutely. Like in my previous role, I was part of like many procurement deals at Instabase, and I saw the risk and IT teams of massive banks and insurance companies trying to understand our platform in great detail. Sometimes that process would take more than 3 or 6 months. And during that journey, I realized that like security and compliance is not only about being defensive, but it is so much about building trust. The cloud technology has been amazing, and it has allowed us to deliver software at a much faster speed, but it behooves your customer or prospect to trust you with their data. And as a result, they need to believe that you have all the right processes to, like do the right thing. And I think like that's the crux of, like all the security and compliance, processes. Also, like while I was seeing all of these, like processes inside Instabase, I was noticing the same thing crop up amongst a lot of other founders who were at a much earlier stage, and they were dealing with this problem, earning the security compliance certificates and attestations for the first time and trying to get their first few deals in the market. And a lot of the problems in compliance are about understanding unstructured data and making sense of it, like whether you are getting ready for an audit or you're going through an audit process. And a lot of my work at Instabase was about building products which could help people understand unstructured data at very large scale. Therefore, I was curious that can we solve this problem in a better way by building an AI native product offering? And that's been, like our journey over the last year or so. We have been taking an first principles approach to how do these workflows look like if you build a solution not only around automation, because you can bring a lot of like technical integrations to different aspects of software and collect evidence, but how can you also like look at various workflows around getting ready for an audit, getting through a vendor review, going through different security reviews, and how much of that work can be actually done for the humans so that they
Right.
can focus on the hard problems which really require judgment. So yeah, I think like we are still taking baby steps, but it's been a fun journey so far.
So these compliance things are always one of those. We were talking with a CIO a week ago, and she was talking about, whether it's M&A activity or whether it's just keeping the lights on. That so many people misunderstand that side of the business, right?
Hmm.
You understand product. We build a product. We
Hmm.
sell a product. We understand sales. We
Yeah.
understand support. But she had to kind of almost reintroduce the concept of, hold up, IT is not just about delivering systems, maintain security in our infrastructure, in our data. We make sure that this institution is safe from vulnerability and threats. And it was a little bit surprising that I was like, shouldn't CEOs, CFOs, like these should be right on top of their mind? And so in early starter and founders, I think even more so, it's probably not as much of a concern, or maybe it is, but they just maybe don't know how to solve it. So talk to me a little bit about when you think about enterprise versus when you think about early startup found ups, SOX, HIPAA, all these words. Is it just like jumbling in their brain and they're like, I don't know what to do with it. Yeah, I know it's probably important, or do they know it's important?
Yeah, I think you bring out a good point. The importance of security and compliance and how it is practiced can look very different on the two sides of the spectrum. In a company which is selling to large enterprises, it is very common to have dedicated trust teams, which are looking at implementing security controls. They are busy doing review of all the different vendors that you're using. They are implementing a dedicated vulnerability management program. For example, at Instabase, like anytime we would be using a new library or a software vendor, we would be doing a thorough review of them, because these large banks and companies are very conscious that any security vulnerability can be used if it becomes part of their system. And therefore, the posture you have to take is very conservative when you are a large enterprise or you're serving large enterprises. And this really, is something that you have to think about very similarly to your engineering roadmap. A lot of times, the product and engineering choices you are making have to take this into account. If a technical approach looks very fast, but it would introduce many new vulnerabilities, a lot of times we have said no to that path because we know it would show up in a lot of security reviews and may mean that an enterprise CIO would walk away from the deal for
Right.
that reason. On the other hand, I think the early stage founders are so busy in surviving. They are looking to build something useful, raising money, finding the first few customers, that unless they have come from a security or a DevOps background themselves, often their first introduction to security and compliance is they are about to sign a contract, and then somebody would ask them for, before we do this, I do need your SOC 2 report or ISO 27001 certificate. And then a mad scramble ensues to figure out what does that mean and what is the process to
Right.
get that. I think things have changed quite a bit. Like over the last 5 or 6 years, there has been a lot of work in the compliance automation space, where the cost of getting compliant and the time to get compliant has come down a lot. Like there used to be a time when people would have to budget $50,000 to $75,000 in order to get SOC 2 compliant, and that was a large amount of money. It's
Yeah.
almost like saying, "Hey, I'm here, looking to hire a new person." And now that process has become much cheaper and simpler, at least for early stage companies, with tools like ComplyJet and a lot of others in compliance automation category. But you're right, a lot of people are not familiar, and hence our work inside ComplyJet is a lot about education. We work with a lot of early stage companies, and we end up building a lot of collaterals, and a lot of my sales demo calls are really about educating people on
Right.
what do they need to go through this process.
Right. Well, what's the pain point we're solving for, right? And in some cases, that education is you don't even know there's a pain, but you're about to feel it. So you talked a little bit about the expense and about the time. One of the things you guys talk about within your product, it's like 7 days, right? Which is amazing. So if I'm a founder and I find myself, holy moly, I've got to give you a SOC 2 compliant answer and right away, or this deal's not going to close. So talk to us a little bit about, I mean, vendors, you talk to any vendor, we'll get you up and running in a week, right? Talk to me about how that process works for people who are, okay, find themselves in this position. Really, 7 days is amazing.
Absolutely. I think there are three main areas of work when you are getting ready for SOC 2 compliance. It's essentially a framework which was put together by AICPA around best security practices around your engineering infrastructure, your HR processes, your IT processes, and how do you think about risk management. They require you to configure your engineering infrastructure correctly. A lot of that happens off the plate if you're using a public cloud or a Git hosting solution like GitHub or Bitbucket. And now we are able to help you with creation of a lot of artifacts like security policies, creation of your risk register, doing vendor reviews. Our AI copilots, which are trained specifically for compliance, is able to build a lot of those artifacts based on the organizational context. For example, if you're selling to large enterprises, your security policies and processes should be far more conservative versus if you're selling mainly to SMBs. And in that case, the way you think about your processes has to be very different. We are able to build a lot of these artifacts for the teams, and they are spending much less time building these things from scratch, and they're spending a lot more time on reviewing them or making sure that the configuration of their engineering platforms is correct. As a result, we are able to bring down the total time it takes a typical early stage team from 50, 60 hours, which it used to take earlier on another compliance automation platform, down to maybe 10 to 15 hours. And if you really have a deal on the line, I have seen teams get SOC 2 audit ready in 2 to 3 days because you really can, run through that process. The audit itself, typically takes 1 or 2 weeks because audit firm wants to, review all of your evidence on the platform to make sure that they are satisfied. But the audit readiness piece can definitely be done in less than a week now, and we see a lot of our customers being able to get there.
So as a founder of a company, what do you usually educate people on? When do you start this journey? Is it ever too early or ever too late?
There is similar to thinking about technical debt. There is a little bit of compliance debt which you take on if you aren't, doing this from day one. For example, things like you haven't implemented the right access policies. Some person who may have, left your team may already have access to a system which they shouldn't have, and that's a big security risk. But you are able to cover up a lot of things fairly quickly when you are small. The biggest thing I tell founders is to think about security and compliance as a first class citizen in your customer's buying process, just
Mm,
like you're validating whether the pain point is real or not and whether your solution is a good fit for that. I think the founders have to spend a lot of time on what would the buying process look like. A
right,
lot of times, if you haven't come from a sales background, you aren't really sure about what the buying process of your prospect and customer segment looks like. And while you are figuring that out, like very quickly, you will see what are the different security standards and compliances that they expect from you. And based on that, you need to think about it as any other roadmap investment or hiring decision that you make. If you are looking to close some of your first POCs 3 months down the line and people expect you to be SOC 2 compliant, then you need to start your journey right now. Whereas
right,
if some of the early design partners are SMBs and they do not really care about your SOC 2 compliance, then you're fine. And maybe you can
right,
prioritize this roadmap later. And therefore, I think like it is really buyer led. Increasingly, what I'm seeing though is as the effort and cost of becoming compliant has come down, a lot of people are investing into this early into the process. They want to reduce the friction
right,
as much as possible. They want to appear more trustworthy. And security compliances are one way to appear more trustworthy to all the
right.
stakeholders in the ecosystem, for sure.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important part of it, and I like how you talk about the selling process because I think a lot of times you see this with founders. They have a great idea for a product, and their product people or their marketing people, they're not salespeople, and so they kind of don't think of that sales process and what's that process and what's the customer talking to, and then when they get that deal, they're like, "Oh, I got to have all those things." I'm not prepared for that.
Yeah, yeah,
So you've been a founder, you've been around engineering, you've talked about that. AI, of course, has changed the conversation for everything, right? I remember when Salesforce first was introduced and software as a service seemed so revolutionary. Right? Hey, you don't need those big ERP systems that's going to take 18 months to implement. We're going to implement you in 3 months, right? Now it seems like AI just keeps on compressing the timeline. So when we talk about technology and you use the word AI native, and we're now seeing companies who are just, oh, we're AI. We're an AI company now. And we're like, well, weren't you just a SaaS company last week? Now you're an AI
yeah,
company.
yeah.
And we know that they're not AI native softwares. So talk a little bit about what it means to be an AI native software versus in what I call an AI bolted on software.
Absolutely. I think all the SaaS companies are having an existential crisis moment right now, similar to what you referenced, like when Salesforce came up with its end of software campaign. I was actually looking at picture of Mark, like in that famous 2000 poster when Salesforce ran this, massive campaign around end of software. And a lot of people are under a bunch of pressure. The money has dried up a little bit and a lot of the funding has gotten concentrated into AI companies. And therefore, a lot of people are rethinking their positioning even before they're making any meaningful changes to their product. So, with that as the context, and I think like that's what explains the behavior of almost everyone in the ecosystem that you are forced to take up an AI first positioning. Otherwise, you do not even have a shot at being in the market. I think there are a certain examples in which you are able to see that like by using the new AI breakthroughs, you are able to achieve outcomes which were not possible earlier at all. Some of my favorite examples actually come from customer support and contact center industries. Earlier, coach in a contact center would probably listen into 1% of the calls and provide feedback to all of their employees in the contact center. Now it is possible for AI systems to look at the recordings of all of the calls, provide granular feedback to all the people in a very specific way. And that changes how we think about the coaching and the quality of all of these customer support systems. And a lot of the people who are working in this industry are even experimenting with, do we need human people to do some of these jobs? Like, can we have agents who, like are trained on all of this, like data, and they are able to, like make some of these calls. On the other hand, you have some legacy companies who have been running contact center softwares, like for decades, and they are adding a lot of like bolt-on features. So I think if you really think about AI native workflow, it is really important to think about, are you able to build systems which are getting smarter? They are able to take outputs and, learn from them over time. Are they truly delivering outcomes versus just, like building another workflow which a team has to go through? And is there a leap in the capability, like what was simply not possible perhaps a couple of years ago is now suddenly within grasp? I think the only caution I would give is, it's very easy now to have very compelling demos, and the devil lies in taking something which works really well as a compelling demo for 10 minutes and making it a production grade system, because there are so many edge cases that you have to think about. How do you make sure that you are not making mistakes which where cost of mistake can be really high, especially in heavily regulated industries like healthcare, banking, insurance. And therefore, I think there is a lot of euphoria, which I think is very justified. But then there is a long journey ahead in making sure that we are able to build systems which people are able to rely on. And I think right now there are both of these narratives which are present in the enterprise ecosystem. A lot of people are, this is, like going to be transformational, and a lot of naysayers who are talking about, but there is no value being delivered. And I think there is a bit of truth in both. And we are on a journey right now where a lot of the value will be delivered and a lot of processes and industries will be transformed, but it will take time.
Right. Yeah. And this whole idea, all these companies laying off and people saying, oh, it's AI. I mean, Benioff, laid off 4,000 people and said, oh, because AI is working so much. And then people I heard were at Dreamforce last week said, oh, he's kind of rolling back that narrative a little bit. And so we get into this human in the loop, human out of the loop, right? And how much are we really taking the human out? Because to your point, and kind of the discussion we had earlier is, well, if your process and your documentation and your data are all poor, then you're now asking a system to make a decision that a person with critical thinking can make and adjust on the fly, where the system may not be able to do yet. Right? Maybe 5 years from now, we'll all just be sitting on the couch. Somebody the other day on a podcast said, oh, it's going to be universal income and people will be working 15 hours a week, And so whether we get there or not, we'll see. But talk a little bit about your experience in terms of whether it's with ComplyJet or just kind of your experience as working with other founders, this whole idea of human in the loop, human out of the loop, and how people should think about their AI journey in terms of that.
I think it's very important to look at what's the level of risk of a certain use case and think about like what's the bar on accuracy and reliability we think about it. For example, like when we look at a robo taxi which is driving down downtown San Francisco, the bar is going to be very different from when a system has to create policy artifacts for, let's say, a healthcare claim, and something much lower when you are providing recommendations for shopping.
Right.
Because the cost of making a mistake in all of these three situations varies dramatically. And I think like that's what's very important. The context of what's the cost of a false positive, what's the cost of a false negative in all the use cases that we are looking at, and very important to judge that carefully before we make any decisions. For example, while I was at Instabase, we were looking at both corporate credit agreements as a problem as well as consumer lending. In case of corporate credit agreements, the size of transaction was very high, and like the need of a human in the loop was justified because the cost of a mistake would be in few millions of dollars. Whereas there were some customers who were processing consumer lending at very massive scale, like millions of consumers every year. And folks were happy to have some error rate when it came to
Right.
issuing the loans. And I think that's really a business decision. In our own world of compliance, for example, we would not want any company to share any information from their engineering systems without review. Nobody gives us access to their production systems, even
Right.
though we understand how to fix the configuration, because it is such a high stake decision that you should not be giving access to your production grade environments to any outside AI system, even if they know what to do. Drafting your security policies based on your context with a small review is definitely something that the systems are able to solve now.
Yeah.
Communication with different stakeholders like auditor teams is an interesting one. Systems can help you like review all the evidence and draft a possible response, but then you still have to take a judgment as a principal on what do you need to say to your auditors or other stakeholders. People get up in arms because they're confusing what's at stake across use cases, and you cannot apply the same judgment or standard
Right.
across different categories. It is really not possible.
So if we think about the workforce of the future, I mean, those are some very different skills, right? That you're talking about, applying risk, understanding the use cases. Like these are things that I wouldn't say are ignored. I find they don't sit with them, if that makes sense, right? Thinking about the process, talking about the use case, and what's the risk, and what is our threshold for that risk. It's not usually conversations that we've had with SaaS or other softwares. So what do you think about when you either hire for ComplyJet, or when you advise other founders on what skills to be looking for, even advising people who may be coming up, right? We always want to nurture the younger ones and bring them up as they're coming in through the organizations. What do you talk about in terms of skills that people should focus on as this AI kind of traction takes more hold into the workforce?
I think there are three things which I keep going back to, which have helped me as I have led teams and like built teams, whether inside my own companies or other organizations. First, I think it's really important to be clear on what's the job to be done, and based on that you think about what is the right skills to hire for. One of the things that people are looking at is a lot of the workflows today, can they be assisted and improved using other AI tools? In the past though, when new technologies came, a lot of the workflows themselves were reimagined. For example, when the keyboards were invented, we did not have better typists. All of us became typists because now we were able to do that very easily. And now it is quaint to think that there used to be people whose full-time job was to do that. And I think that is something people are not appreciating enough, that a lot of the workflows inside companies are changing a lot. I see this a lot inside product development, where the loop between engineering, product management, and designers has to be much tighter. And we are increasingly getting to a place where a single individual who has the right product sensibility may be able to do these three things together, which used to be three different functions. And that's an example of using a lot of the new tools. A lot of these skills may get, stacked on top of each other. Like it will not
Right.
be a designer with better, design tools, and a PM with PM tools, and engineer, with coding tools. It may be just one person who's, pushing the product. I think the second part is, it is really important to focus on where do you see the value in your industry and your business process. The uh, amazing thing about any technology is that it can solve a lot, but unless you have the right context and you are able to focus on what's the high value pain point to solve, technology cannot really bring value in isolation. And the people I see being much more successful with adoption of AI inside their companies, they have a very, very clear view of what are some high ROI wins, whether they
Right.
lie in marketing outreach or customer support or making changes on the engineering side. Like they have a very clear view on what are the experiments they want to run, and they are able to focus on them and ignore the other areas. There may be 10,000 tools out there, but perhaps it is better to focus on the two or three problems that you believe can generate the most value inside your organization or industry. And I think the third aspect is when there is a lot of change, you need to focus on your speed of iteration and learning. There is going to be a lot of difference in what is possible today versus, like what was possible 6 months ago and what is, like possible 6 months later. Therefore, it is really important to be very agile and be out there conducting small experiments. And that starts with the leadership. Unless you are role modeling that behavior and being vulnerable and experimenting with new things, even though, like you may be an executive who's used to leading 5,000 people, if you are not out there showing how you are experimenting with things in your own daily, like work, it is going to be really hard to role model that for,
Right.
all of your teams and, like direct reports. And I think it is okay to make a lot of mistakes, but like if you are not experimenting, then it is likely that you'll be left behind in the future.
Right.
And, like when I'm hiring or I'm, like talking to people, I'm usually curious about what are the new things they have tried and what have they learned from it in the last week, the last month. And if people do not have specific examples to share with me, it usually is a sign of lack of curiosity, which is something
Right.
you do not want, either in a collaborator or, like in a team member on your organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody who's, in their 50s and in sales, and he said just that. He's like, I don't want to be the dinosaur.
Hmm.
So I am building these GPTs, these custom GPTs, as hard as it is for me sometimes to grasp the concept, as easy it may be somebody who has a technical background, right? Salespeople necessarily, unless you're selling a technical product, often don't have that technical capability in their history. But he said it was important for me to model for the team. So I love that answer because I think a lot of people are seeing that, whether you're, the CEO or whether you're working in, just doing a entry level analyst job, right? And I think a lot of the discussion people are having now is AI is not taking your job. It's the person who knows AI that's going to take your job, at least now. And as the technology advances, we'll see what happens. Talk a little bit about. I don't want to talk more about kind of your philosophy on a lot of things. I was, like I said earlier, I was looking through your LinkedIn and listening to some of your messages, and they were really profound. So I do want to get some thoughts around that before we finish. Talk a little bit about when we talk about hiring. So we had a discussion with a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this whole idea of taking jobs, and he said one of the risks he's been seeing is that they have senior people in roles. So let's take an engineering role who understands how code work. They've been coders, they've built code, they've evaluated code, they've QA'd it and ensured it got into production. And they say one of those areas, Sam Altman was interviewed and said, it's iffy what's going to happen here, but it's definitely a good use case, right? And what this gentleman's take was the concern is that if junior developers have never really developed code, and then they're trying to evaluate what the AI did, they just don't have the practical experience to do that. So as these senior coders start retiring, are we creating a whole group of people who really don't understand the basis? And how good is the AI going to be versus how much is a person really still going to need to evaluate that code? So what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are making.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Now, well, I like the word you use because the gentleman we talked to, his role is called value creator for private equity, and this idea around value is really important, and it's interesting because I don't know that traditionally T or maybe legal or HR, some of these other areas have seen that they're a value creator, but they are. I think that the first time AI is really becoming the first time where companies are really coming together through technology like never before. So SaaS was really focused on go to market space. And although people use Workday for HR and this and that, I feel like AI really has an opportunity to connect data, insight to all areas of the company in a very streamlined fashion, which I think is a very different approach. And I'm interested to see the evolution of companies as they start realizing the power of the information they can gain. And do leaders like IT leaders and others start saying, here's how I create value for the company. Because at the end of the day, that's all stakeholders and shareholders care about, right? Is what is your profit margin, right? And how can we be value creators? So I love that approach. And I think everybody should think about their role in terms of value creation, no matter how big or small within the company. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think one thing I've always coached people on is it's your career, not mine. Right. So I think in companies, people get a little institutionalized. Oh, there's a hierarchy and I have to get to the next level and the next level. I think people sometimes don't let their mind expand beyond their role and think about how they can create more value. So I do love that. So I was listening to a lot of the videos you put out on your LinkedIn. And as somebody who started companies, it's a lot of the stuff resonated. And I wanted to get your take on some of the stuff you say for people listening. So the first one I found really interesting is selling your story. That is, as a founder, as somebody, and I think this could be true of any company, but you're best poised to tell the story of your company as a founder versus hiring people and having them try to sell your company. So talk to me about that philosophy and kind of how that served you. Right. Yeah. Right. Well, I think there's a little bit of vulnerability that people, I think, get a little nervous about. And I mean, I personally have found when I, write something or I put something out there, the more it is personal, the more it is a little vulnerable. When I was laid off from Salesforce during the massive tech layoff, and I put out a blog post about what it was like to go through that. And the ironic part of the story was I was with my family in San Francisco at the time, the morning I got laid off, like literally a hotel looking over the tower, and just like this massive tower looming over you. And you're like, this is awesome. And people really resonated with that because they were like, I've been through that. And so you talk a lot about the pain point, and a lot of people had commented when you started ComplyJet and how you presented it is love this pain point. This is such a pain point. The comment over comment that I read was you've nailed it. And so I love that about your story as well, is you've really thought through what problem are we solving for people and letting them attach to that problem statement and say, yes, hi, I've got that problem. Yes, that's me. So I love that about the story. And it was just really interesting. So I do encourage everybody listening to go to your LinkedIn page, LinkedIn with you, and listen to the videos, because there was a lot of great kind of nuggets in there about manufacturing. You can't manufacture a sense of urgency, right? I loved that. You can't force people to say, I need your product. You've got to bring them along in that journey. Okay, so please go. Right. So before we close, a couple of quick, like, kind of rapid fire questions. What do you think the most overhyped AI thing is right now? What do you think the biggest hype around AI is? What is a resource that you find valuable that you think everybody should reference in terms of their AI journey? Is there a podcast or a learning site or something that people should take advantage of? Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking the time with us today. It's been a great conversation. And we'd love to, as you continue your journey and AI evolves, we'd love to have you back and talk more about it. Great. Thanks. Bye.
One,